Judith Daly has had more than 30 rounds of chemotherapy, but she doesn't want any more. It's not that she wants to die, she just wants to see out her time on her terms. But Judith lives in New South Wales, the only state where voluntary assisted dying remains unlawful.
Judith Daly is dying.
I haven't got a time frame. I haven't asked for a time frame. I want to keep plugging on as long as I can.
But the emphysema and cancer in her lungs will eventually get the better of her.
I'm not ready to die, but at the end of my life, I'm going to be drowning in my lungs. I'll be choking and suffocating.
And when that time comes, Judith says she simply doesn't want to live through it.
Even though palliative care has made wonderful advances and they're doing brilliant things, they're not going to be able to help me. They're not going to stop me drowning. And that's why I want a choice. No one else is going to be able to say, you can keep doing that a few more weeks.
Bottom line is, you're saying to me you don't want to die in pain.
No, exactly I don't. There are people who have a great faith, and I fully respect those people. If they believe that there's a higher meaning in their agony, I totally respect that, and they can suffer as much as they want. Just don't make that choice for me.
So when it gets too much, Judith wants voluntary assisted dying. But there's one problem. She lives in New South Wales.
People who suffer terribly at the end of life, people who suicide because they feel they have no good medical options.
These days, Andrew Denton has gone from TV presenter to assisted dying advocate after witnessing his father's slow, painful death. Now he is fighting for the last state still holding out, New South Wales, to go the same way as the rest of the country.
And these are people at the end of terrible diseases, cancer and motor neuron disease. And I've spoken to a lot of the families. They are so grateful. I've spoken to some of the people that actually use the law, so grateful that they didn't have to go through that last terrible phase of their illness.
I don't think that voluntary assisted dying should be passed in New South Wales.
But across town at Sydney's St Vincent's Hospital, the head of palliative care, Professor Richard Chai, has a very different attitude.
We have to do better in looking after our patients first, looking after our population first, before we really consider voluntary assisted dying.
Palliative care themselves say they can't deal with all suffering, and it's not just pain, Brady, it's suffering.
Can it stop all pain and suffering? The answer is no, it does not. Yes, if a patient has 8 or 9 out of 10 pain, I can reduce that to 4 or 5 out of 10 pain.
Professor Chai says many terminal patients are taking their lives because of fear and not knowing the advances in palliative care.
A lot of the patients who've committed suicide in the last 30 years that I've been involved with have all said they were afraid of problems. They were afraid that they will be in pain.
But proponents say access to assisted dying will only be possible after exhausting every other avenue.
These laws are really difficult to access. They're very specific about who can use them. You have to be clearly dying. You have to be clearly suffering. You have to have all the alternative options discussed.
You've got to be mentally competent to be able to apply for it. So you can't have someone knocking off granny.
And as the years and debate have gone on, the argument that death is God's decision and not mere mortals is also not gaining momentum.
Countries like Portugal and Spain have got it. They're serious Catholic countries, but they've got it.
Hi Judith, how are you?
Robin Pitts checks on her friend Judith most days.
Not too bad.
I just don't want her to suffer.
I come down here and I see her just coughing and coughing and coughing, and it's a terrible thing. As a close friend, we have to experience that.
And Robin brings up another argument, often used in the debate.
We wouldn't allow our animals to suffer the way we ask our human friends to do that. I had a dog and I love my dog. And I took it to the vet and they said, you can't take it home, it's too sick. You know that people wouldn't leave.
Robin is one of a high percentage of people saying the individual should have the sole right on how they die.
Now it's in the mid-80s. It's just gone up and up and up. And that's because, I think, two reasons. One, a surprising number of people have had an experience in their own family of seeing how difficult death can be. But secondly, I think most people get that the basic proposition that if you're terminally ill, you're clearly dying and you're suffering, then you should at least be offered a choice about how much you should suffer. I think most people think that is a reasonable thing.
But the politicians and not the people, say Judith, will decide on this emotional and controversial issue. In the last state, still dead set against it.
They shouldn't be voting about the way they feel. They should be voting the way their constituents feel.
There was a doctor in Oregon, in North America, where a similar law has been running for 20 years now. And the same tiny number of people have used that law every year for 20 years. It's tiny. And he put it beautifully. He said, I have no idea why people think there's going to be an avalanche towards these laws. It turns out people just don't want to die.
And a reminder, Lifeline offers 24-hour crisis support. The details are on your screen.